The early October breeze swept over Alder Park, stirring fallen leaves into spirals as morning joggers made their way along the winding trails. It was a peaceful Thursday in Crestwood, Oregon. Mothers pushed strollers. Retirees sipped coffee near the duck pond. Everything about the morning felt routine until the screaming started. Officer Maria Torres had just stepped out of her cruiser when her canine partner, Rex, a muscular black German shepherd, suddenly broke from her side. One moment he was sitting obediently, the next he bolted across the grass like a missile. Maria spun in panic. "Rex!" she shouted, running after him. People scattered. Someone screamed, "He's going after that man!" By the time Maria reached the scene, Rex had already tackled a man to the ground, his jaws locked around the man's shoulder. The victim flailed, yelling in pain. Blood soaked through his running shirt. Rex growled but didn't thrash. It was surgical controlled, yet terrifying. "Out!" Maria commanded, breathless, grabbing his harness. "Out, Rex!" The dog obeyed, teeth releasing the man's flesh. He stepped back but didn't retreat, eyes locked on the man as if daring him to move. The victim, moaning, rolled over, and that's when Maria saw his face. "Dr. Miles?" She gasped. Landon Miles was one of Crestwood's most respected citizens, a senior physician at St. Vincent's Hospital, active in local charities, and the smiling face of dozens of public health campaigns. To see him bleeding, in shock, on the ground because of her dog, it made Maria's stomach churn. Within minutes, EMTs arrived. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting Dr. Miles onto a stretcher. "Severe laceration to the deltoid," one said. "Could have been worse." Maria stood motionless as they wheeled him away. Rex sat at her heel, panting heavily, his tongue lolling out. He looked calm, not deranged, not out of control. But the damage had already been done. By noon, the story had spread across town like wildfire. "Beloved doctor mauled by police dog in park," blared the local news app. Footage taken by bystanders showed Rex's bite, the blood, and Maria screaming for him to stop. Everyone had an opinion. Facebook lit up with demands that the dog be put down. The mayor issued a statement calling the attack deeply troubling. City council scheduled an emergency meeting for the next day. Parents warned their kids to stay away from the police canine unit. Someone even defaced the station's sign with the words, "Rabid Monster." Rex was immediately quarantined at Crestwood. Animal control. The city vet would evaluate him for rabies or signs of neurological damage. Maria, visibly shaken, was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Sitting alone in her apartment that night, Maria stared at the wall. Pictures of her and Rex covered the mantel. Rex wearing a canine vest beside rescued children. Rex receiving a departmental award. Rex resting his head on Maria's lap after a 12-hour shift. She couldn't make sense of what had happened. She had trained him herself. He wasn't just a working dog, he was her partner, her friend, and he had never attacked a civilian. Never even growled without reason. That night, she visited the animal control center. One of the techs let her into the isolation wing, whispering, "He's been pacing, but no aggression. No drooling. Doesn't look rabid." Maria stepped into the kennel. Rex looked up. When he saw her, his body relaxed. He came forward, ears perked, tail low, and rested his head against the bars. She knelt beside him, brushing her fingers through the gap. "Why, boy?" she whispered. "What did?" "You see?" Rex blinked slowly. He wasn't rabid. He wasn't panicked. And Maria knew in her gut he wasn't wrong. Something had happened in that park. And Dr. Landon Miles wasn't just a victim. The town of Crestwood had a short memory. Just last year, Rex had been hailed as a hero after tracking a missing child. through the woods during a snowstorm. He'd found little Sammy Harper curled up behind a fallen log, shivering and barely conscious. The photos of Rex lying beside the boy until help arrived had gone viral, landing him on a segment of Good Morning America. Now, those same townspeople demanded Rex be destroyed. Maria Torres sat in her darkened apartment, blinds drawn, phone on, silent. The only sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock and the occasional bark echoing in her mind. Her inbox overflowed with voicemails from news reporters, department officials, angry citizens, even her mother. Most started with concern, but all ended the same. Why would your dog do that? That was the question Maria couldn't stop asking herself. Why would Rex, her loyal, disciplined, highly trained canine partner, suddenly attack Dr. Landon Miles without reason? The official narrative was straightforward. Dr. Miles had been jogging through the park alone. Rex had broken protocol, slipped his leash, and attacked without provocation. The mayor called it a tragic breakdown in safety. The chief of police issued a brief apology and promised a thorough internal review. Maria wasn't buying it. She had worked with Rex for nearly 4 years. She had trained with him day in and day out, endured the freezing cold, oiling heat, and even a car crash together. Rex had apprehended suspects, located missing persons, and saved lives. He was more than a tool, he was a partner. A partner who didn't just snap. She needed answers. The day after the incident, she returned to the scene in Alder Park. The yellow police tape had already been removed, but a faint dark stain marked the ground where Miles had fallen. Nearby, the city had installed a temporary warning sign. Aggressive animal incident, use caution. Maria walked the path slowly, watching, listening. She tried to see the scene as Rex might have. She imagined the sounds, the scents, the subtle changes in energy. Her training taught her that dogs reacted to things humans often missed: stress hormones, intent, adrenaline. And something about that day had triggered Rex. She sat on the nearest bench and opened her laptop, reviewing. The park surveillance footage downloaded from a backup copy a sympathetic dispatcher had quietly sent her. The angle was poor, blurry, distant, but it captured the key moment. At 9:42 a.m. Dr. Miles jogged into frame, headphones in, his stride relaxed. At 9:44, Rex appeared, running toward him. At 9:45, something happened. Maria paused the video frame by frame. Just before Rex lunged, Miles had reached into his pocket. His hand fumbled. A small object dropped, something metallic or glass. It disappeared into the grass. Then Rex reacted. It wasn't the charge of a rabid animal. It was a calculated move, a trained takedown. He went for the shoulder, not the throat. He held, not mauled. It was a controlled intervention, not a frenzy. What were you holding, Doc? Maria whispered to herself. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. That Rex had smelled something, recognized something, and responded. Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification ping. It was an internal memo forwarded anonymously. It read, "Reminder, all narcotic logs must be updated within 24 hours of access. A missing vial of ketamine from last week remains unaccounted for." The timestamp was 2 days before the park incident. The sender? Ridgeview Veterinary Clinic, where Dr. Miles volunteered monthly. Maria leaned back, eyes wide. Why would a human physician be logging controlled animal sedatives? And more importantly, was that what had fallen in the grass? She saved the memo and closed her laptop. She no longer believed Rex had gone rogue. Something had happened in that park. Something Rex had sensed before any human ever could. And Maria was going to find out exactly what it was, no matter who she had to go through. 3 days after the incident, the town was still buzzing. Some claimed they always found Rex intimidating. Others blamed Officer Maria Torres for losing control. But nobody questioned Dr. Landon Miles. He was, by all accounts, a model citizen. At St. Vincent's Hospital, Dr. Miles had built a reputation as calm, professional, and endlessly generous. He volunteered at shelters, donated to veterans programs, and had recently launched a wellness initiative for teen mental health. His smile was plastered across billboards and bus stops, often paired with phrases like, "Caring starts here." The interview he gave from his hospital bed only fueled the narrative. "I don't want the dog destroyed," he told the news anchor softly, his arm in a sling. "I'm sure he was scared or triggered by something. It's a tragedy for everyone, including the officer." He earned a standing ovation at a city council meeting via Zoom, but Maria watched the footage with narrowed eyes. His tone was too measured, his smile too easy. Something about it felt staged, like a man who knew exactly how to play the public. That night, she opened a blank document on her laptop and titled it, "Miles, Unexplained Connections." She started with the ketamine. The veterinary clinic confirmed that Dr. Miles occasionally dropped by to consult on animal tranquilizer interactions with human medications. A vague role, unofficial, and apparently without much oversight. One employee, speaking anonymously, admitted that Miles had full access to the locked med fridge. Maria cross-referenced inventory logs. A vial of ketamine had gone missing 2 days before the park incident, but no internal investigation had followed. It was simply noted as unaccounted for. She scribbled in her notebook. Why would a doctor pocket ketamine? What was he planning or hiding? Frustrated by the lack of answers, she decided to dig deeper. Not into his public record, but into what had been buried. She called a friend in the Oregon Medical Board. "Off the record," she asked, "any disciplinary flags on Dr. Landon Miles?" The silence on the other end lasted too long. "There's nothing official," her friend finally said. "But there was an incident. A sealed report from Ridgewood County. A patient complaint. No charges, but it rattled some cages. He left the practice quietly afterward." Maria's heart beat faster. Ridgewood was 3 hours away. The next morning, she drove out in her old Jeep, following winding roads through thick pine forests, until she reached the small, faded hospital at the edge of town. There she found an elderly nurse named Carla Green, sipping coffee outside the employee entrance. She introduced herself and showed her badge. Carla blinked, hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You're not the first one to come asking about him," she said, "but you might be the first who actually wants the truth." Carla told her about a 17-year-old girl who had come into the A one night, dizzy and in pain. Miles insisted on examining her alone. When the nurse returned, the girl was unconscious. Later, she told her parents something had felt wrong, that he touched her in ways that didn't make sense for the diagnosis. The parents demanded answers, but the hospital moved quickly. Legal threats, sealed documents, and then silence. Within 2 weeks, Miles resigned. A month later, he was on staff in Crestwood with a spotless record. Maria sat frozen, goosebumps on her arms despite the afternoon sun. The dots were forming a picture. A doctor with a pattern. A missing vial of sedative. A dog trained to detect drugs, stress, and predators. She thanked Carla and drove home in silence. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. No message, just a photo. It showed Rex at the park, mid-lunge. Below it, one line, "Tell your mutt to keep his mouth shut." Maria's grip tightened. They were watching her, and someone out there was afraid of what Rex knew. Asterisk, back in Crestwood. Maria stared at the threatening text on her phone long after the screen had dimmed. It wasn't just a warning, it was confirmation. Someone was watching her movements. Someone was nervous, and that someone had underestimated her. Resolve. She uploaded the photo and metadata to her encrypted drive. The GPS was scrubbed, and the timestamp oddly altered, as if someone had edited to hide where it came from. But she saved it anyway. Every piece mattered now. Over the next 2 days, Maria immersed herself in Dr. Miles' history. She visited the Public Records Office, combed through archived articles, and dug into long-forgotten medical board newsletters. His image polished, perfect, was almost too clean. But every so often, there was a pattern in the gaps. A brief departure, a sudden job change, a deleted press mention dot. It wasn't what she found that told the story. It was what had been erased. Late Thursday evening, she sat at her desk, surrounded by open folders and cold coffee, when her phone rang. It was Kira Novak, an investigative journalist Maria had worked with once on a domestic trafficking case. "I heard about the dog story," Kira said. "The one that bit the golden boy doctor." "You heard right," Maria replied. "Except, he's not so golden." Kira paused. "I've been getting messages, anonymous tips. Stuff about Miles, going back years. Nurses, patients, even a pharmaceutical rep. You and I might be on the same trail." "Good," Maria said, "because I'm not backing off." They agreed to meet the next day at an off-grid diner 30 miles out. Until then, Maria couldn't sleep. The next morning, she made another stop, Crestwood Animal Control. "Just 5 minutes," she begged the technician. "Please." The young woman hesitated, then relented. Maria stepped into the holding area and knelt in front of Rex's kennel. He perked up the moment he saw her, pressing his nose to the bars. "You remember him, don't you?" She whispered, voice trembling. "You knew. Before anyone else." She reached into her coat and pulled out an old T-shirt one Miles had worn during a town blood drive the year before. She'd pulled it from a donation bin at the hospital. Rex sniffed it, then backed up, lips curling into a soft growl. There it was again. Recognition. Not confusion. Not fear. Instinct. Maria, single quotes, his mind reeled. Drug dogs could detect trace chemicals on clothing. But Rex wasn't just a tracker. He was trained in behavioral cues. He could detect stress, fear, aggression, and whatever Miles had done or planned, Rex had remembered. Back at the diner, Maria met with Kira in a corner booth. The journalist dropped a thick manila folder on the table. "This," she said, "is what your department should have found if they bothered to look." Inside were statements from 2 former nurses and an intern who'd quit their jobs at separate hospitals shortly after working under Miles. Their stories matched. Odd behavior, invasive questioning, patients waking disoriented with no memory of sedation. One woman, a surgical assistant, had even filed a complaint, but her supervisor called it a misunderstanding and buried it. Miles had moved towns 3 times in 8 years. Every time a red flag was raised, Kira said, he slipped through the cracks. Powerful friends, legal pressure, payoffs, and everyone let it go. Maria's stomach twisted. But this time, she said, he messed with the wrong partner. Before Kira could respond, Maria's phone buzzed again, this time with an urgent notification from the veterinary lab she'd contacted privately days earlier. She opened the email and stared at the highlighted line. Substance confirmed. Ketamine. HCl. Dosage consistent with animal sedation. Presence detected in canine bloodstream within 24 hours of administration. She swallowed hard. He drugged Rex, she said aloud. Kira's eyes narrowed. Which means it wasn't an attack. It was retaliation. Maria leaned back, pulse racing. This wasn't about a dog losing control. This was about a predator losing his grip, and Rex had tried to stop him. But Miles had friends in powerful places, and Maria had just made herself the next target. Maria didn't sleep that night. The lab's confirmation that Rex had been sedated with ketamine gnawed at her thoughts like a warning siren. The dosage had been low, just enough to disorient or dull response, not incapacitate. It hadn't been a fluke or accident. It had been intentional. By morning, she sat parked across the street from Ridgeview Veterinary Clinic, watching as the staff filtered in through the rear door. She sipped bitter coffee and scanned the alleyway until a familiar figure stepped out. Lana, the vet tech who had once cared for Rex during his surgery the year before. Maria rolled down her window. "Lana," she called softly. The woman froze, then cautiously approached. "Maria, are you okay to be here?" "Off the record," Maria said. "I need 5 minutes, that's it." Lana hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Make it fast." Inside the clinic, Maria walked past racks of kibble and glass cases filled with pet vitamins. Lana led her to the back where the drug log was kept. A clipboard with intake and dispensation entries hung neatly on the wall next to a small lockbox fridge. "Shouldn't be showing you this," Lana muttered. "But you should know. There was a weird entry 2 weeks ago." She flipped to the previous log and pointed to a line point. 0928. Ketamine 1 vial dispensed, noted by Dr. L. Miles. "But Dr. Miles isn't licensed to dispense veterinary drugs," Maria said, frowning. "He said it was for research, some cross-disciplinary study. He was charming about it, you know. Nobody questioned him." "Where was the vial supposed to go?" Lana shrugged. "He said he was taking it for analysis. Never brought back paperwork. A few days later, it went missing. But we figured he had permission." Maria took a photo of the logbook, then turned to the fridge. It had a small digital lock. "Code?" Lana shook her head nervously. If I open it, I'm fired." "Then don't." Maria pulled a penknife from her pocket and pried at the top hinge. It clicked loose. The fridge creaked open. Inside were 5 vials of ketamine and several boxes of sedatives labeled for large animal use. But what caught Maria's eye was a sealed white envelope taped to the underside of the top shelf. She peeled it free and opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper labeled, "For Dr. L. Miles, confidential." It contained lab notes and something else. A USB drive. Maria didn't stop to read it there. She thanked Lana, apologized for the risk, and left immediately. Once inside her Jeep, she drove to the outskirts of town, where cell reception dipped and nobody bothered her. She opened the files on a secure laptop and found herself staring at a nightmare. The documents contained Miles' private notes, observations about canine responsiveness to emotional distress, reaction to neurochemical triggers, and most chilling of all, test subjects, female, trauma history preferred. He'd been experimenting not on animals, on people. And Rex? Rex had been brought in under the guise of a behavioral study. Miles had documented the dog's intense reaction to a nurse's presence after she'd left an emotionally abusive marriage. Rex had growled when she entered the room. Miles called it data confirmation. Then, weeks later, he had administered a sedative to see if it would dull the instinctual warning behaviors. Maria's blood turned cold. He hadn't just drugged Rex, he tested him. And when Rex reacted again in the park, remembering the scent or presence, Miles had panicked. That attack had been the dog's judgment. And now, she had proof. But there was still the matter of who was helping Miles stay above the law. This kind of file, hidden away, indicated he wasn't working alone. She forwarded the data to Kira with the message, "Leak everything. We go public now." Her hands trembled as she hit send. Maria glanced in her rearview mirror. A black SUV had turned onto the road behind her. She watched as it crept forward. Matching her pace. Her phone vibrated again. Blocked number. No message this time, just one word. Stop. Maria floored the gas dot. They were done, warning her. Now they were coming. Asterisk, the morning sun spilled through Maria's window, but she barely noticed. Her mind raced, replaying the chilling files she'd uncovered the night before. The encrypted data. On Miles' experiments, the sedative logs, the clinical notes, all pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to see. She knew going public was risky. But the truth demanded a voice. Across town, Kira Novak's investigative report had just hit the front page of the Crestwood Gazette under the headline, Doctor or Predator? A Hidden History of Landon Miles. The story detailed Maria's findings, the anonymous testimonies, and the damning lab results. Social media erupted. Suddenly, the town's collective denial fractured Dot within hours. The Gazette's tip line flooded with calls and emails from people who had stayed silent for too long. Maria spent the day meeting with new witnesses, women who described uncomfortable examinations, unexplained sedation, and hushed warnings to keep quiet. One young nurse, Emily, handed Maria a crumpled envelope filled with text messages between Miles and a former patient. The messages grew increasingly manipulative and threatening as the patient tried to break free from his control. A hospital intern shared an account of a late-night shift when Miles had brought Rex into the clinic. The dog growled and barked at him, breaking into an aggressive stance the moment Miles entered the room. Staff had tried to calm the animal, but Rex's instincts were clear. He wasn't just a trained police dog, the intern said quietly. He was trying to protect us. Back at home, Maria watched Rex pacing in the yard. Despite his ordeal, the dog remained alert, sensitive to every sound. Maria knelt beside him. "You're a good boy, Rex," she whispered. "They don't deserve you." But their safety was far from guaranteed. Anonymous threats, continued voicemail recordings of heavy breathing, messages like, "Drop it now, or you'll regret it," and shadowy figures lurking near Maria's apartment. One evening, as Maria returned from a meeting with the survivors' support group, she noticed headlights lingering too long across the street. A sleek black sedan sped away when she met its gaze. She wasn't alone. The pressure was mounting, but Maria refused to back down. The police department, meanwhile, was forced to act. Public outcry demanded a formal inquiry, and a special prosecutor was appointed to reopen investigations into Miles' past. For Maria, the most important victory came in the form of a quiet meeting with Rex's vet. The dog's latest health reports were clear. No signs of neurological damage or rabies. His bite was an act of protection, not madness, but the healing was only beginning. That night, Maria sat down with Kira to plan the next steps. They needed to expose the network of silence that had allowed Miles to move undetected for so long. "This is bigger than one man," Kira said. "There are others who covered for him." Maria nodded. "And we'll find them." Outside, Rex's low growl cut through the dark. Maria knew her partner was ready for whatever came next. Together, they would bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The news spread like wildfire. A warrant had been issued for Dr. Landon Miles. He was officially a fugitive, wanted on multiple charges, including unlawful sedation, sexual misconduct, and obstruction of justice. The arrest shocked Crestwood, but it was just the beginning. Maria stood at the precinct's makeshift command center, watching officers coordinate with state police and federal marshals. They tracked Miles's last known movements, a rented cabin on the outskirts of the state, then a suspected flight to a neighboring state. A man had vanished. Days blurred into nights as the manhunt stretched on. Maria's phone buzzed nonstop. Tips from the public, anonymous leads, and threats that had become more frequent and sinister. But amidst the chaos, something else was changing, something powerful. The town's mood began to shift. Where fear and denial had once reigned, Reluctant acceptance took root. At a public forum, hundreds gathered in Crestwood's community center. Maria stood beside the mayor as survivors told their stories aloud, some for the first time. Tears mingled with anger and relief. "This isn't just about Rex or me," Maria said, voice steady but firm. "It's about every person silenced, every fear ignored, and every truth buried." Some in the crowd murmured, others wept openly. But most listened. Even the mayor, who had once called for Rex's retirement, now spoke in support. "We failed you," he admitted, "but we're committed to making this right." Back at the Animal Control Center, Rex's quarantine officially ended. The chief announced Rex's return to active duty, praising his instincts and loyalty. Maria held Rex close when he was released, whispering, "Welcome back, partner." But the victory was bittersweet. Miles had left scars on victims, on the community, and on Maria herself. The next morning, news broke that Miles had been spotted in Nevada, trying to board a private flight under a fake identity. U.S. Marshals coordinated quickly and arrested him before he could flee overseas, handcuffed and silent. Miles was flown back to Oregon under heavy guard. The trial would be long and brutal. Maria sat beside Rex as they watched the coverage unfold, knowing the hardest battles were still ahead. But for the first time since that terrible day in the park, hope was tangible. The dog, who had once been feared, was now a symbol of courage. A town that had once doubted was starting to heal. And Maria, she was ready to fight for justice, no matter the cost. 6 months later, the courthouse in Crestwood was standing room only. News vans lined the street. Protesters, advocates, and survivors had gathered in support of the women who had come forward. The trial of Dr. Landon Miles had become more than a local scandal. It was now a national conversation about power, silence, and the instinct to ignore uncomfortable truths. Inside the courtroom, Maria Torres sat quietly near the back, her uniform crisp, Rex resting at her feet. Though not allowed to testify as a witness, Rex's name had been mentioned nearly a dozen times during the proceedings. The prosecution built a damning case. Dozens of women shared eerily similar stories. Vague diagnoses, unauthorized sedations, groggy awakenings, gaslit doubts. A forensic analyst confirmed that ketamine was used as a means of impairing memory. What Miles had hidden for over a decade was now laid bare before a jury of his peers. Miles sat stone-faced through it all. No apologies. No remorse. Just the same blank, practiced expression he'd worn when Maria first saw him in that hospital bed. But no amount of arrogance could change what had been uncovered. On the 7th day of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts. A wave of emotion surged through the courtroom. Some victims wept. Others clasped hands. Maria exhaled slowly, one hand resting gently on Rex's back. He looked up at her as if he knew. Later that week, the governor invited Maria and Rex to speak at a public safety forum in Salem. They were presented with the Medal of Civic Courage, and Rex was honored as the first canine in Oregon history to receive official commendation for instinctive protection of civilians against a non-criminal predator. During her speech, Maria stepped away from the podium and crouched beside Rex. "Dog isn't just my partner," she told the crowd. "He's the reason we're here today. He didn't attack out of fear. He remembered what so many of us wanted to forget. And he did what most of us were too afraid to do. He acted." The room fell silent. Then came the applause, sincere, lasting, cathartic. Back in Crestwood, things began to shift. The police department implemented new oversight procedures for external partnerships. The hospital created a task force to support patients reporting inappropriate conduct. Survivors received pro bono legal help from a nonprofit that opened its doors after the trial. Maria and Rex returned to patrol, though Their assignments now often included visits to schools, women's shelters, and therapy clinics. Everywhere they went, people thanked them, not just for catching a predator, but for giving them permission to speak, to trust their gut, to believe that silence wasn't the only option. But even heroes need peace. On a quiet spring morning, Maria took Rex to Alder Parkback where it had all started. The trees had shed their fear. The trail felt safe again. She tossed a ball, and Rex chased it down with joyful ease. For once, there were no shadows, no suspicion. Just a cop and her dog, healing Dot as they rested on a bench. Maria glanced down at the bite scar on her forearm from a case years ago. It reminded her of a truth she would carry forever. Sometimes, justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with a bark, a growl, or a bite from someone who refuses to stay silent. She looked at Rex, who sat beside her, head high, eyes calm. "You were right all along," she whispered, "and I'll never doubt you again." He thumped his tail once. Then they walked on, partners still, guardians now, symbols of a story that nearly got buried, but didn't. The end.